Is there anything you think they're doing as far as like how they go about searching for those new ways to evolve that another business could learn from, or maybe just the approach that you think they could take away?
One thing that I think is very key is Jerry being extremely open-minded to being able to look at the trends, to be able to look at things, to try different things and go, you know what, I think I can do this.
Welcome into the Independent Thinking Podcast. This is your host, Rob Stott. Up in the Pacific Northwest, there's a business up there, a member of Nationwide Marketing Group, DeWaard Bode, a business that was founded back in 1941 under a different banner and selling, much different product than the appliances and whatnot that you would find in their stores, in their showrooms today. And started as Credit DeWaard and selling, there were home appliances, but also, a mixture of automobile tires and some other hardware and things like that are not in their location today. But an awesome opportunity, I think, to sit down with Jordan Roorda of DeWaard Bode, a guy whose fingerprint, whether you know it or not, and we dive into it, is all over this podcast. We call it we call it today because of Jordan. So it's an interview that we promised him, back in, early 2020 when the podcast launched. He was supposed to be one of our initial episodes, but it's been 3.5 years since the launch of the podcast. And here we are finally getting him on in mid-October of 2023. So we appreciate him taking that time and diving into the history of DeWaard Bode and what they do today, some of the differentiators of the business, what separates them from their competitors in the market, and some of the things that they do differently. They place a big emphasis on events and having the local community come in and participate in some things that they have going on around the Black Friday holiday season. So we're coming up on this year's edition of that event for the D&B team, and dive into that. Some of the things that they do within their stores to ensure that they're evolving and staying up with the times, and much more. So a great opportunity to check in with Jordan and D&B to see how things are going and just catch up. So we appreciate him taking that time, and we're going to dive into it right now. This is Jordan Roorda of DeWaard Bode here on the Independent Thinking Podcast. All right, we are back on the Independent Thinking Podcast, and I get to call it that because of the guy I'm talking to today, whether he remembers it or not. I'm sure he does. I don't let you forget it, really, Mr. Jordan Roorda of DeWaard Bode. Appreciate you hopping on this podcast that is like 3 years, 10 months in the making. How's that sound? Been trying to get you on here. That's what I've been told. Now, well, I appreciate you jumping on, man. And first of all, before we dive into that little story, how are things going?
Yeah, things are going fantastic. I mean, I really do feel like some days you have to choose it, and a lot of days you have to choose it, and so and make it happen as best as you possibly can. And that's the world that I and we choose to mostly live in. And so it's a good day.
The retail business, and we get to talk about it every week on this podcast. And to jump back to that story for a second, for those that don't know, when I came on board and decided, Nationwide needed a podcast in late 2019, we got our start in 2020, early 2020. Good timing to start a podcast, right? Right before everyone has to sit at home and listen to things. So we, threw the call out there to the membership to help name the podcast. And there were some floating around there. We had some great suggestions and ultimately landed on Independent Thinking because of a submission by you. We were like, hey guys, hey, smart people over there, you have a name and a brand that you can lean into. And I appreciate that. That was like the kick we needed to really lean into Independent Thinking, man.
Well, that was very, very sweet of you to say that. And yeah, it is a good name. So
yeah, for sure. You had some other suggestions like Rose's Ramblings, or I don't even remember, some funny ones that were out there, but maybe someday.
Hear Jeff Rose's voice too.
No, I love it. Well, again, appreciate you jumping on, and excited to dive into to business and into what you guys are doing there up in the Pacific Northwest. So, appreciate it. And start there. Like, tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know. Who's Jordan Roorda and what's your background and path to what path did you take to what you're currently doing there at DeWaard Bode?
Yeah, Rob, thank you very much. I actually want to add on to your story about that in 2019. It was close to the same time that I jumped on a podcast with Dos Marcos. And at that time, what COVID did actually hit. And so everyone was scrambling on who's essential, who's not essential, how to treat people, how not to treat people. And I really do feel like this is a time again with what's going on in the world and so much uncertainty, both with the economy nationally, locally, and internationally, that it's kind of interesting because I was thinking about it this morning and again, I will come back later on in our interview to try to recap kind of what the thoughts were of that podcast during that time. So kind of an interesting tie-in, I think. About myself, I'm one that doesn't like to necessarily talk about myself. I'd rather talk about somebody else or learn about somebody else. So I hope for whomever's listening to this that they can get something from it for sure. So I am born and raised in Linden, Washington. I've done a lot of traveling, but stayed local. Worked for my father for many, many years, went away, came back. And really, as far as the industry in DeWaard Bode started, it was Jake DeWaard and Roorda Bode, and they started years and years and years ago. And I remember as a little kid, my father, worked his butt off, but he would take me with him, whether it was a Saturday or whether it was even a holiday when the store was closed, and I would help him clean, move appliances, clean toilets, just all that type of stuff. Probably cheap child care, but so it was something that, as far as hard work and what family meant, really was instilled in me a long time ago. And even before that, actually, I always like to say my story started more so with my grandfather. And my grandfather actually was a Dutch immigrant, came over after World War II, was a farmer and a bricklayer. Spent a lot of time at his place, and between his work ethic and what he ended up teaching myself, and both my father and what my father taught me as well, really gave me a love and a passion not only for our country, but also for our local community. And so to me, it's wrapped up in a word of legacy, of course. And so my passion is really, really derived from that. So growing up, like I said before, of course, a lot of store involvement, a lot of hard work. And it would be the entire family. I have a brother and a sister, of course, too, and they would also help out, and my mother. And so with DeWaard Bode, it was Jake DeWaard and Roorda Bode, like I mentioned earlier. And my father, Jerry, actually worked for them for many years in delivery and then sales management. And then he was going to leave. And it was Jake that said, "No, I don't want you to leave. Let's find an opportunity." And actually, it was somebody in the buying group that he went to with a business plan, and went and ended up helping him develop that plan and buying into DeWaard Bode. And eventually, in the late '90s, he bought it fully out. So him and Doreen were sole proprietors of the company since. And so, fast forward for him 40 plus years. For me, and now it's been 22 years. It's just, it's been amazing to see the growth, to see the people come through, see the people stay, to see the customers. And that's really, that's the exciting part.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, the cool thing too is that you still get a firsthand, even though the name on the wall, right? We talked to a lot of people. The last names are the names of the business, right? But you still got to see that sort of work ethic of starting from delivery, working through becoming, whether part, investment in the business to fully taking it on. The work, to your point, work ethic, right? And it's been instilled in you since the beginning. And to watch that had to be I think, a unique experience for you, kind of growing up in the space and within the industry.
Oh, absolutely. You know, what's fun about it is I was able to go to the buy group shows at a fairly young age in my teens. And so it was one of those things where I really enjoyed not only getting to know people, but I love figuring out how things work. You know, I love
Yeah.
figuring out how organizations function, you know, how, what makes the difference in organizations. And, you know, very simply, it is people. You know, I still love that to this day. You know, I love figuring out how things work. I love meeting new people. I
Yeah.
love fostering old relationships. And because, you know, appliances is the vehicle, mattresses is the vehicle, barbecues is the vehicle. If you're a vendor, that manufacturing is the vehicle. But really, what we get to do and who we get to meet and the opportunities we have and the impact that we can make, it's not something that you go to a career day as like a high school or college student and go, this is what I want to be, you know.
Right.
I remember growing up thinking like I wanted to be a pilot or an NBA player. And even though I had decent height, um, work kind of came first. And then pilot, you know, I'm 6'5", so it's not very comfortable to sit in anything but first class. So those two things, yeah, they're not happening. But that's okay because there is one other passion I do have that still can happen. But for those who know me, know what that is. You know, it's not to be a bald male model either. Yeah.
Oh.
So anyway,
Well, I love it because you kind of jumped me on a question I love asking in these podcasts, and that is, you know, did this path always, you know, was it always the option for you, or did you feel like you had the opportunity to go, you know, obviously with thinking about being a pilot or an NBA player, you know, you had other ambitions, but you know, did you feel like there was always a calling or something pulling you back that just wouldn't let you get out of this space, this industry?
yeah, absolutely. You know, even from a young kid, I always wanted to be, you know, a moral good businessman, a Christian businessman. Like to me, that legacy to be able to be to grow to yeah to do the right thing. That really was probably the biggest pull for me. And again, there's so many vehicles to
Yeah.
do that. And again, we screw up all the time, so there's no perfection, there's no whatever. But that really, and that was really modeled to me, you know.
Yeah.
And again, the opportunity. You know, I go back and talking about my grandfather. It was post World War II. I mean, it was rough in Europe, and then to be able to come over, and it was so cool this summer. My second cousins from Holland actually came over and spent
Wow.
some time with us, and it was just so much fun. I've been back, of course, too, but it was just so good to see them and to know the opportunities that we were given. That even though they're wonderful people, hardworking, successful in their own rights, they don't have the same opportunities even to this day.
Right.
And so yeah, so there's some drive and passion from there. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. So what, you know, if someone that visits a D&B showroom today, what's the experience like? What are you guys trying to set up for that customer experience as they walk through your doors?
Yeah, always first and foremost to be greeted. It's very simple blocking and tackling, you know, making sure the front's beautiful and clean. And we were talking earlier about staff and some of my most favorite people, coworkers, never call them employees or just coworkers, are like the warehouse, reception, entry level position. You know, when we're onboarding, if you want to call it that, when they're starting new, I always tell them two things. One, our job's the same, and that's to take care of people inside and outside the building. The only difference is our responsibilities. And then the second thing is like when you're walking in, how do you want to be treated? How do you want to be greeted? What do you want to see? Like so literally, you know, some of the coworkers, I'll say, okay, well, let's stand in front of the building. What do you see? And that's even for how store layout. Again, not perfect, but how store layout is, how flow is. And then the second place I take them is to where the owner walks in. You know, and so those are the two most important spots where the customer sees and where the owner sees. And if we can take care of those things and make sure that's good, we're off to a good start. So
No, that's awesome. Well, what they may not see today. And I love this. You know, you guys have a really cool representation of how you kind of lay out the history of the business on your website, the About Us page, and diving through the timeline. They may not see tires anymore. I
Yeah,
think
for
kind of
sure.
diving back into that. You know, the business has evolved a lot. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I actually still have I have that picture in my office
That's
that
awesome.
has them. That's just so cool.
That's incredible.
Along with some other old ones, but yeah. Well, what's so unique about that is our original location. The tire shop actually is right behind it, and it's still there. And
Wow.
there was the hardware store part also was just across the street. Now it's moved since, but it kind of divided up, and but the tire shop is still there actually.
That's crazy.
Um, and it's kind of cool too because
Yeah.
in that spot there was an old train car that would go through there, and so literally our term carload does come from train cars,
Yeah.
and so they'd be dropping off appliances, tires, all kinds of
Wow.
crazy stuff. And even though the train's gone, the that track and that tire shop is still there, which is pretty cool. When it comes to again, our history, and that's something I always ask people too when we're doing interviews. So like, what do you know about us? And it's not necessarily, totally testing if they've read our about us page or if they know us, but it is interesting because it's important. The thing is Costco's growing. They're going to out Costco us. .com fill in the blank. They're gonna outdo it. So who are you? What do you stand for? And how do you treat people? And people still want to buy from people, even though obviously there's increasing habits, trends, growth areas, of course, that are showing others, other things. But again, who do you want to buy from?
Right.
So we
No.
definitely try to model that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, talk about the so timing wise, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's like early 2000s, right? That you guys come in, your family kind of takes ownership and can really start putting the fingerprint on it. So what do you remember about from then to kind of where it is today, sort of the ways the business has evolved and what you've been able to do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, what was really interesting was so we had three locations and it was downsized to one, then to two, and then grew back to three. So at that time, between the locations and the leases and the setup, there was some cleanup that needed to be done. And it doesn't mean that there was, failure on the part of previous ownership or anything like that, but there needed to be a turn. And that's something that Jerry and Doreen did a really great job with some slight rebranding. The name had been around since 46. So it's like you've been pounding that name for so many years. To change it's kind of unless if it's like a bad slang word now today that wouldn't be before or something like that. Like it's not smart to change those things, but doing some light rebranding and turning is always important, always important. And I'll never forget, with retail specifically, unless if you're mentioned Costco, unless you're by like a Costco, retail in towns things do change. I mean, for example, when's the last time you've been to a mall?
Right. Yeah.
And it used to be you would want to be next to the mall. They had free parking. It was huge. It was like, hey, now like shoot, we still have one of our locations by a mall, but that's really, yeah. Again, I'd ask you.
Right.
I'm going to ask you. When's the last time you went to a mall?
Well, so being in suburban Philly, we have there are a few around, but the last time I went out of my way to go to one, when it wasn't, now I will say some of them they've done a nice job attracting families that have young kids because they put like a Lego land. It's those cornerstone pieces,
Yeah.
right? Like a Lego land, or there's a carousel or rides inside. But to go to a mall to like shop, it's been a while.
Yeah, I mean, outside of those big key stores,
Right.
Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, or something like that.
Exactly.
No,
Yep.
no. So, in saying that, not to give them plugs at all, in saying that, looking at the past with the DeWaard Bode in the last 20 plus years, it's we've moved locations. Like we've had to evolve and change. I mean, even during COVID too, um, one of our locations was really challenged with, um, you know, uh, current politics and different things that would grow certain things, and not necessarily in a positive way for one of the locations. And even that was tricky too. So again, you have to constantly change and have to constantly give the right messaging and adapt. And everybody knows that you have to
Yeah.
change, and change is not easy. It's hard. There's still plenty of changes we still need to make, and we're still trying to make. But as you're asking the question specifically, I would say, what's the most unique, coolest thing to see is to see, numbers and locations are great. And don't get me wrong, we have some awesome growth, and Jerry and Rena have done a fantastic job in growing from where they were to where they're at. But really showing a balance and showing what we're good at,
Mhm.
and trying some things and failing from time to time, but really keeping in the core of what we're awesome at. And so really just a nice balance of business between offering something from high end to low end, from scratch and dent to built in, from builder sales to entry level replacement. Um, that's really where I've been probably the most excited to see how healthy the balance is
Yeah.
in the company.
Well, the cool thing in hearing you describe it too, from where it kind of was to what it's become, is that you have the opportunity. Not only do you have the opportunity to, as a smaller and independent business, but you actively go out and look for ways to evolve and make sure that you're doing the right thing. Something that, those other names you mentioned, it's a little bit harder to do that, right? So the fact that you take advantage of your position as an independent business to adapt and evolve and look for those things. Is there anything you think they're doing as far as like how they go about searching for those new ways to evolve that, you know, another business could learn from, or is, I know it's not going to be the same necessarily for every business out there, but maybe just the approach or something like that you think they could take away?
I think the one of the things I'd mentioned specifically is, especially on a smaller business scale, it's really hard for owner operator to be able to have the capacity, to have time, to be able to network, to be able to reach out, to be able to have your eyes open. This is the silliest cliche, but it's so true. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I'll throw out one other cliche, and Tom Hickman has said this before: "We is smarter than me." And so, any way that you can connect, and that's why I love our buying group so much, our group so much, is because the connective tissue is so strong, and it's there, and it's available, and it's open. So even if it's a single store and you can't make it to the shows, there's people to reach out to. There's ways to connect, and Nationwide is actively trying to make sure and foster those areas for being able to connect, because there's so many people that are dealing with so many of the same issues, and whether they're big or small, it could be the same issues. There could just be more zeros behind one versus the other. But I mean, and again, those are a lot of cliches, but they're so true. One thing that I think is very key is Jerry being extremely open-minded to being able to look at the trends, to be able to look at things, and with his upbringing, to try different things and go, what, I think I can do this, or why not try it? Why be stuck? I'll never forget my grandmother specifically was, she always made clothes, and she always would take style and design from Europe, because obviously she was from
Yeah.
Holland,
Yeah. Right.
and she would try to make these things, and these things would be a couple years ahead of time. And that's something too that I think that's kind of ingrained in both my father and in our family and myself, is just kind of looking at trends and looking at things and going, yeah, that can work. Um, and the thing is as you grow and as you get bigger, it is harder to get more people on board with that. So that is a difficult thing. So small owner operator, you don't have time necessarily to connect and to learn. However, there is a lot of ways. But the beautiful thing is you can pivot so much faster, like you mentioned, what those other companies can. And that's something that is amazing. Jack Welch wrote a book called Winning, and he specifically talks about that in that book and how that was so important for them at the time of the GE to be able to pivot. And I would say that if you're a smaller dealer, you're listening to this, if you don't have a lot of time, but you are listening to this, that means you do actually want to continue to grow. You can change quick,
Yeah.
so don't let those dollars that you may not have, or that connectivity that you may not have, intimidate you. I'd encourage you. You can change quicker, and there's less minds you have to change because of it. It's harder when you've got more minds involved. But like I said, we are smarter than me. So being able to make sure you do have the right people and get their ideas. And the other thing too is Jerry's always asking to the younger folks too what their thought is, because he wants to know, okay, what are the younger people thinking, and seeing, right? Let's not get just stuck in our own bubble, or even get stuck in an area where it's like, you need to hear what I have to say.
Right. It's checking that ego at the owner's entrance to the business, right? Making sure that you value those opinions that are around you. And to your point about not being afraid to pivot, like that in and of itself might be just something that I think a lot of people need to hear. Is they may have ideas, but they're a little hesitant to do something because it may fail. I've heard you say the word fail a couple times, throughout this talk, and not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to, go after something that you think could, pan out, because maybe it will. The chances are it will. Chances are, it might not, but at the very least, you learn from it and you kind of move on from it. Which, that's awesome. And I know one of the things too that you also mentioned was connective tissue, right? I think no better example of that than kind of what you guys are doing with connecting within your community. And I know a big part of your customer experience has been around, and we talked about it, not in Nashville, but I think back in Dallas, there was a panel that you were on, and I got to be a part of, where we talked about sort of the things you guys do, and alongside a couple other retailers, within your communities, and events were a big part of it for you guys. Something that I know you mentioned then you plan on leaning more into, here. So kind of set the stage a little bit. Talk about what DeWaard Bode's doing around events and why that's such an important part of your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that. And I have to give credit to NMG, and also Greg and Katie Loft, because they took it even further than what we did. And they had an amazing event because of it. So we used to be able to do a direct mail piece called a private letter sale, really sometime around our anniversary, obviously before Black Friday. And that would be special for people. We'd have some prizes and stuff like that, but really it was a sale. And post COVID, but pre-COVID, we looked at it and went, people can buy stuff cheap online, or they might be conditioned for holidays. How are we going to not only drive traffic, but how are we going to get folks to hang out with us? How are we going to get those footprints? So we said, you know what, why don't we turn this into a hosting event? We already are a part of the community, and Jerry and Doreen are very, very benevolent in taking care of the community, and they don't love talking about it. They don't love, they're the kind that kind of slip a check in and take off, which is great. And we also need to highlight those charities more, and also highlight the community more. And everybody has their thing that they are passionate about. We had this conversation, and I know one business in Florida that they're behind veterans. And it's like, you know what? That is your thing then. That is what you need to be behind, because they need support too, right? For us, it's a lot to do with food banks, homeless, women, children, and that type of thing. And so those usually are the charities that kind of we get behind. So more specifically, they were asking about, we started doing this hosting event, and we call it the Black Friday Early Access event. But what we're really doing is we are raising money for a local charity. We're doing giveaways. We're having manufacturers come in with their either funding for chefs or prizes and music. And yeah, we have beer and wine. And we give a 3-hour window for people to come by, have fun, be able to support a charity, be able to win something. And there's lots of great prizes. So there's a lot of winners. And yeah, we do give early access to some hot deals and stuff. So, we're not going to waste that time. and we definitely do try to collect some information and get to know people, and again, have as many reps or buy-in that we possibly can. This year's really exciting. I'm so excited for this year. We actually are going to have No Child Hungry come. So we're not only going to support our local food bank, but actually we're going to do meal packing for Maui.
Awesome.
And so it's going to be such a fun event. Can't wait to see Mike and those folks. And so we're inviting also a couple different entities come in, some Rotary people, some business folks from our Builders Association. Obviously, we're going to try to get some other folks in there too. So definitely some community key people. But I'm pumped because
Yeah.
I talked about it earlier. The last podcast I was on, we were just starting out COVID, and there was so much polarization that was going on, and how to manage that both in the workforce and your customer base. And there's so much polarization today. Obviously, there's a lot of scary things that are going on internationally. And a lot of stuff that is probably going to continue to happen that we don't have control of. So again, I come back to saying and encouraging, how can you affect your local community? How can you affect your neighbor? How can you affect your coworker? And for a lot of folks, they tune out and go, that's nice, but that sounds like BS. Well, at the end of the day, it's how you treat people. And so this event is an opportunity for us to invite folks into our living room, which is our showroom, and to treat them well. And to just, we end up getting, 300 to 400 people easily in that short amount of time. And it's a blast. And it's going to be about support, and it's going to be about fun. And at least it's a few hours that we can go ahead and enjoy together. And while, the world keeps spinning and all this other stuff happens. So, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And to see how it's grown too. What's that mean to you? The kind of effort that you guys put into it, and to see how the event itself has kind of taken shape over the years, and to what it is today. How much, not necessarily how much effort, but what's it mean to you to see sort of what it's become?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. It's just another action arm of really what our core beliefs are. And so to be able to have the space and capacity to do that, it's really hard sometimes for the ownership or leadership to buy in when they haven't seen it, or when they've never been able to be given that opportunity. That's another thing to talk about too. There's a lot of folks that don't do things because they weren't given those opportunities. So you don't know what you don't know, but if they know that their business is going good and is going a certain way, why change it?
Right.
Okay, we need to change a few things here or there. Our programs change annually. Okay, reps change, bosses change. Obviously there's ebbs and flows, but again, that you can't control, and that's change is inevitable. This is change that you can make and control, and it's fun to see it. And so you do actually have to have people that are motivated to do it. There's going to be naysayers. That's okay. We ran an event at one of the locations, and you would have thought from one of the management that it was the worst thing that we ever did. And the reality is it was missing the boat on that, because what we were doing is we were hosting people in that community. And so again, it does last. Time is the most important currency that we have. And so for you to be able to go, and within reason and help, to go, how do we make it worth people's time, and how do we get their time?
Yeah. To see it kind of evolve into what it had. Really, it's about finding that thing. You mentioned it, finding that thing that is your thing, and making it happen. And I can't imagine anyone getting upset about driving some foot traffic into your store around what's otherwise a pretty important time of the calendar year. So to just develop that thing, it's better, in the marketing world, right? It's like you want any press is good press. And in this case, you're doing something on behalf of the community with the support of others and bringing people together. So it's thinking outside of that box. And, when I say box, I didn't mean your four walls of your retail store, but that's honestly what you're doing too, right? So to be able to do that within your community, and, see it have the success it's had, and will continue to have, obviously, because you guys are still doing it is pretty cool. And I think something that everyone can learn from. So you just
So
got to
Rob, I have
find
a
that
question
thing.
for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt. I have a
No,
question for you. So I understand that baseball fan, but also I understand that you know a thing or two about wrestling. Is that right?
I might.
Yeah, you might. So when you first started, um, and or when you see people who first start, what does it look like?
Well, it's funny you asked because I happen to be the novice coach, so the coach for our high school wrestlers who have zero experience, and I'll tell you, to call it a train wreck would be kind of an understatement.
Yep.
But it's a work in progress. You got to start somewhere.
You took the words out of my mouth, and that's no different with
Yeah.
whatever your thing is. You
Yep.
got to start somewhere, and practice builds muscle. Practice is a muscle, and that's something that whatever it is, even if it's small scale. I've got a really good friend, and I kept challenging him. He opened a new little business, and I said, "Okay, what's going to be your thing?" I'm like, "It doesn't have to be my thing, but what's
Right.
your thing?" And so finally, a year into his business, he told me, he goes, "Hey," he goes, "we are finally going ahead and we are going to support our food bank." And I'm like, "That's awesome." And so he told me how he's going to do it and everything. And I'm like, "Dude, that's fantastic." And that's your thing. And they support local musicians too. And so between those two things, that's your thing.
Yeah.
And it's, first time you tried it, didn't really work. People, you could look at your peers and you can be intimidated by it and that they do the X, Y, or Z, or, maybe, there's some ill will because, it's not the same thing they do. But
Right.
at the end of the day, it's not about them,
Right.
don't let them stop you from being you,
I love it.
yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Well, I think a great take home message too, right? Got to start somewhere and don't stop being you.
Yeah.
Two excellent points. If you take anything out of this, that's it right there. So, Jordan, I appreciate it, man. It's like I said at the top, 3.5+ years coming. So I
Yeah.
appreciate, you finally hopping on and finding the time for us. And, great to have you on, and, hopefully not another 3 years before we have you on again. So this was a good time.
Well, if you keep sending me wine like you did, then I have to say yes.
Eventually it's going to happen one way or the other. No, we
No,
appreciate it, man. This was
yeah,
a lot of fun, and look forward to catching up. We'll be in Vegas before we know it here.
yeah. We'll be in Vegas a few times, so yes, it'll be
Amen.
good.
We're gonna might as well take up residence there
I
for a
know,
little
I know, exactly.
bit. Awesome. Well, appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good, Ron. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, and thanks again to Jordan for taking that time and finally jumping on the podcast to chat with us about some of the things that they're doing up there in the Pacific Northwest and at D&B. So we appreciate it, and look forward to catching up again soon, because they've got a lot of great things that they're doing, and some lessons that they can share and best practices across this network of independent retailers. So appreciate Jordan, and as always, appreciate you listening to the Independent Thinking Podcast, and we will catch you next time.